I want to read you a few quotes, just 3 quotes here really quick. This is Richard Horton, editor-in-chief of The Lancet. He said in this article, What is Medicine's 5 Sigma? He said, the case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may be simply untrue.
Totally
by
true.
Studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn towards darkness. Again, another editor. Let me read the 3 and then we'll hit it. Dr. Richard Smith, just to give the body of the concern here, BMJ, scientific peer reviews are a sacred cow. This is what he has to say. He says, Richard Smith, who edited the British Medical Journal for more than a decade, said there was no evidence that peer review was a good method of detecting errors, and claimed that most of what is published in journals is just plain wrong or nonsense. And lastly, another editor, Marcia Engel, and she's from New England Journal of Medicine, she had this to say about the same issue. It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. We're talking about medicine and science. This is what we now know about. You said they had a system in place. They were designed. They have the regulatory agencies testing all of it, right?
Yeah.
Well, we have Robert Roos of the European Union, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, that asked the top executive at Pfizer about the testing of does it stop transmission. This is what she said just recently.
Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market. And from that point of view, we had to do everything at risk.
This made shocking headlines the world over that they weren't actually testing whether the vaccine could stop transmission. I have a problem with what the vaccine actually does. What we actually now know it does is it masks your symptoms. It takes your symptoms away so that you don't end up in the hospital if it's going to do the one thing that they promised it does.
Sure.
So what it actually does is it turns you into an asymptomatic carrier, where you might be sick and stay home and not infect that immune-suppressed child that's walking around. You're walking around thinking you're perfectly fine. So the vaccine is actually more dangerous than the social contract, because I am walking around with a disease I do not know I have. If the product does what they promise it does, you just turned this person into the biggest problem we were all told this was about, was asymptomatic carriers. If it does not stop infection, if it does not stop transmission, it only protects me from symptoms, I'm actually being turned into a potential killer for that immune-suppressed person that's walking around out there.
I don't know.
And I've been robbed of the only signal I had that I was infected.
I don't know that risk, so I can't comment. I don't know the risk of you being asymptomatic and then not, or transmitted or not. I just don't know that risk.
But you are aware that the reason we're all masking and social distancing was there was this problem with the virus that I could be walking around that didn't know I had it.
Yes.
It was a concern,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And we thought the vaccine was going to end that, and instead it causes that even deeper. So if that was a concern, we don't know at what level. We know that was the reason for lockdowns, masks, and the vaccine ending this thing. Immune enhancement, an issue that even Peter Hotez stated in front of our Congress. There's this little pesky problem with upper respiratory vaccines that sometimes the vaccine enhances the disease and helps the disease kill the person. So under those circumstances on my show, I said that is a serious risk. And when I looked at the emergency use authorization, they brought up a disease enhancement, and they said, we didn't really look for it in this trial. We have no idea of telling you whether or not that could happen. So right there is a perfectly good reason why I wasn't going to take it. But I want to be clear in the social contract. Can we bring up Brownstone? This is John Ioannidis' stats on the actual death rate of this virus, because it is what defines whether or not we're in a social contract, is how dangerous is this? The Brownstone Institute put up his data. This this is what we now know about this virus. Ages 60 to 69, the fatality rate was half of 1%. Below that, it starts dropping down into zeros. When we look at children, 0.0003% is their risk of dying, yet we have a much higher risk of myocarditis, pericarditis, all of these things. And so I think science is irresponsible. If it decides to not only allow everyone to get a product when children and everybody below the age of 40 probably have no need to get it whatsoever.
To get what?
Get the vaccine. No need to get it because their risk is so low that in a low-risk space, to do scientific studies that show that you have an advantage, there would be very difficult.
Just to be clear, when was that study published?
That study was just published.
Right.
But let me point out that Johnny Ioannidis published in October of 2020. He looked at this data from around the world very early, before the vaccine was here, across 51 locations around the world. The median COVID-19 infection fatality rate appears to be 0.27%. He's only off, ultimately ends up being about 0.35%.
Sure.
And so my question was, in the very beginning, that was the data we were looking at. We were looking at data and saying this is a very low mortality rate, except for a very specific group of people over the age of 75 that make up about 6% of the planet. And so your social contract seems to be asking me to take a risk with a product that is mRNA has never been really injected into human beings.
Isn't that your grandmother? Isn't this your grandfather?
It is.
Isn't that the people you love?
But should 94% of the planet put themselves at risk with an experimental product when they're not even properly testing it inside of the trials for the problems that it has, or whether it can stop transmission,
keeps you out of
or
the
whether
hospital?
it can protect my grandma?
Doesn't that matter to you as well?
You can give this product to my grandma and grandpa if they want to take it. It's up to them to take it.
But to keep you out of the hospital. You're not a spring chicken, though you're.
I said we can bring it back up at 53 years old. I accepted my risk at I think 0.1%, tenth of 1%, which is a flu. That's the same. We're in the rates of the flu. For everyone my age around, this is just a flu. Okay, and that is statistically provable with a product that we have no idea what the long term.
Here's what you need to do.
Yes.
You need to have that conversation with a medical professional and not me.
Let me bring this up. There's a list of top-ranking medical professionals. Just take a look at them here.
Excuse me,
Dr. Peter McCullough. No, I want to go through what happened
consensus.
Here. This is the problem with the consensus.
You need the consensus.
Okay,
medical professional.
I want you to
because the medical is so huge. I can find you an astrophysicist who is sure we've been visited by aliens. That's not the consensus.
problem was the scientific method died here, and this is the point I want to make.
It
died a death here, and I need you to help me save it because Dr. Peter McCullough is the leading cardiologist.
I don't care if titles don't matter here.
But what should matter?
They don't matter.
What
matters
should matter?
Is the consensus.
What should matter was that the consensus was not allowing to the table.
Then you bring that person here and have this conversation with them. Okay.
I have.
So you don't have to have the conversation with me.
But I want science, and so here's what we have. We have Peter McCullough, world-renowned heart doctor, saying, I am seeing a rise in myocarditis because of this vaccine. We have the leading ICU, second most published science, Paul Merrick. Hear me out here. Hear me out. I know you. I know. All right. These have all been on my show. Dr. Robert Malone, part of the inventing factor behind the mRNA vaccine. All these people have been censored. They were shut down. They were kept from talking to the people in Washington. Johnny Ioannidis was putting out the data.
Censored?
Dr. J, I'll show you.
Okay.
Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Sunetra Gupta, Dr. Martin Koldorf, Oxford University, Harvard School of Medicine, Stanford School of Medicine, they put together the Great Barrington Declaration, which was an approach towards this to say, let's protect that simple small group that we know needs to be protected and figure out a way the rest of us can establish a herd immunity around them. And the NIH, who's supposed to be objective on this, we now have internal email, because this is what I do. I actually put in FOIA requests. We know that this is what Francis Collins said about those people before even talking to them. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of the premise being brought by these scientists. That was the approach to science. No other science can be allowed in here. You started this out by saying every challenge should come in, every way to say that we don't agree with the hypothesis. Maybe these people say you don't need the vaccine, there's a way through this, or we should be tactical with the vaccine. All of these people were kept out of the conversation.
All I can comment
and you were wanting me to sign onto a social contract where the scientific method isn't being used.
Okay, that goes against the consensus, and they want to use that to help other people follow what it is they say. I'm just saying you need someone who represents a medical consensus here to have that conversation with.
We had a medical consensus around a product that we knew nothing about, and a medical consensus around a virus that told us they knew nothing about. They kept telling us we know very little about it. So why was there a medical consensus that was keeping out renowned scientists from the conversation when they were telling us on television we don't know a lot about this virus, we're trying to figure it out? Scientists that were on the ground, that were dealing with patients, were being censored, were being shut down, their YouTube channels were being shut down, their LinkedIns were being shut down.
Because the individual scientist does not matter. We started this conversation on that very fact.
But the scientific method does.
Yes, of course it does. And the scientific method producing a consensus, and whatever is that consensus
all right,
at a
then
given
I'll tell you
moment
this.
is kind of the best you have.
When I can look now in the rearview mirror and said it while it was happening, that there is a, and by the way, all of the scientists I just showed proved to be right. They told you that this virus, that the vaccine would not end this and would actually cause an endemic, because you've now made people that cannot clear this virus and kill it. They're all asymptomatic carriers. That's all this vaccine keeps doing. So now we're stuck with this virus. We didn't follow the same path we always have with every other illness, like former coronaviruses and most of the time
death
flus.
Rates are low. The hospitalization
They were the highest.
is low. I mean, things are fake.
For now. For now, but as you and I both know, these variants continue to be out there, and we are all worried that there could be a variant in the future that could be dangerous. But all that being said, in the end, what I am standing for is that there's no challenge being allowed. That the NIH, when it's telling us, is objectively looking at a virus they're telling us they don't know much about, is pushing out top people in their field who are trying to get to the table. They're trying to say there's something you're not looking at. And this, and when you want to talk about a problem, how about not funding to do that study again? How about not allowing into the room people with great perspective to be a part of the conversation? This is what she's now saying. These are the people we were supposed to trust that you were saying were developing this consensus for us. This is what Deborah Birx says.
Again, you're giving me
individuals.
I knew these vaccines were not going to protect against infection, and I think we overplayed the vaccines, and it made people then worry that it's not going to protect against severe disease and hospitalization.
I know that the vaccine wasn't going to stop transmission, yet Neil deGrasse Tyson is telling everyone that you need to sign a social contract because it's going to keep you from infecting each other. I knew it never was. She's the head of the task force, but we're not letting in scientists that are saying, honestly, in their YouTube channels, in their clickbait space, if that's what you call it, it's not stopping transmission. Here's why we can prove it. Shut them down is what is happening in the NIH. Shut those voices down. We can't get there. To wrap all this up,